This is Environment Long Island. I'm Karl Grossman with Biddle Duke, who recently wrote a guest words in the newspaper, the East Hampton Star, the title, At War with Ourselves. And Biddle begins it by saying, I often imagine what I'll say to my grandchildren 20 years from now when, writing the piece, we can no longer eat shellfish from our harbors because of lawn and garden chemical runoff and septic contamination. Can you elaborate on that, Biddle, 20 years hence?
Well, I was writing about speaking to my grandchildren, and before I answer that question directly, Karl, this comes from a real love of this place, of the ocean and the bays and the ponds, of the environment, the ecology, and the culture of this place, the inshore fishing, the baymen, and the offshore fishing, and the farming that exists here. Just a real love of these two fingers of land on eastern Long Island. So when I was thinking about that and looking around at our environment, I imagined my children asking me, how did you let this happen? And, Karl, you quoted from the beginning there, I live on Accabonac Harbor, or near Accabonac Harbor, a portion of which is closed to shellfishing for most of the year. A portion of 3 Mile Harbor is closed for most of the year. Portions of Shinnecock are closed. And the reason for that is primarily nitrogen from septic systems that are cesspools, basically inadequate wastewater management from residential housing. But also, you know this better than I, other than a small system in Sag Harbor, small wastewater system in Sag Harbor, every person, every house, every hotel, every restaurant east of Shinnecock Canal poos and pees into the ground, essentially. And all of that effluent is either very poorly treated or moderately treated. There are some things that are happening which we can talk about, but that's the primary reason why these areas have been closed to shellfishing, and that's just the shellfishing thing is just one of my concerns, but that is a very sad symptom of what's going on out here. The other reason, of course, is chemicals that people are putting on their lawns and in their landscapes and along our roadways and on our marshes, for that matter, to deal with mosquitoes with permethrin, but also synthetic chemicals that people use for lawns. We could talk for a long time about these issues, but chemicals in our landscape. But the primary reason is nitrogen, and that comes from septic runoff.
And then you go on when the landscape is entirely obliterated with obscenely massive houses.
Okay, so my beef isn't necessarily with the size of houses here, although I feel, as someone who's, I'm a third generation person out here, third or fourth generation. The size of houses, for sure, has changed the landscape, has altered the landscape in a very sort of profound way. There are so many houses that have been built here that are out of scale, out of character, and are essentially the other piece of this. And my big issue is mostly about how they're out of sync with where we are as far as the human race on the planet. Using so much energy only a portion of the year, and then the rest of the year they're still consuming energy, but they're not used for 8, 9, 10 months out of the year. Waste is not something that we can do right now or ever again. It's an affront, essentially, to where we are. So size is an issue only because, not only, size is an issue because aesthetics are important and how we feel as a community about our all of our spaces, public and also just the landscape, is affected by size. But for sure, size is also all about, again, big lawns, big spaces that need PSE&G to heat them and cool them. And PSE&G is mostly natural gas and nuclear. So it's a problem, the size as well. I mean, it's a dual problem.
Well, they're called mega mansions for good reason. And then you go on, when Montauk is an island, when the rising oceans have filled many of the drinking water wells with seawater. I mean, as we speak now, climate change action by the United States seems...
In reverse.
Yeah.
So the town of East Hampton, and there have been other studies, but the town of East Hampton just had a consultant complete a very thorough analysis of where we're going to be in the future. And based on the trajectory now, Montauk will be, very likely be an island. And the date of that is a moving target. But rising sea levels will breach in that peak. What I do now, what you do now, what the people who are building those huge mansions do now, will that have a net effect on whether we can stop the oceans and the bays from the sea levels from rising? I don't know, but we have to try.
And then, well, the knockout punch in the piece, and it's an extraordinary piece. When the grandchildren ask you these questions, like, how did you let this happen? You'll say at that point, anyone would be able to plainly see that life-giving and stunning nature here was systematically devastated between 1990 and 2030. How could you, they asked, let this happen? And then you really provide an analysis of why this has been happening.
So this is a beautiful place, and people want to come here. In my brief lifetime, I'm 59, and I don't have grandchildren yet. I've seen this place, you tell me, Karl, double, triple, quadruple, quintuple on a summer weekend, for sure, in terms of population. But more to the point, I was covering the planning board in 1986 in Southampton when the pressure here was so enticing to the farmers in Bridgehampton that many of them subdivided up their land. And a number of them, I should say. Some still remain. But all of that land between the turnpike and all the way to, Hank, I forget his last name's farm in Southampton, that was all potato farms. I mean, there was a time where you could stand on Panago Road and see the dunes at Further Lane in East Hampton. Those were all potato fields. So obviously I'm nostalgic about that, and I'm very sad to see all of that go. Not that, by the way, that potato farms were an ecological and environmental wonder. There were problems with the potato farming with Temic and other things. But and then the woods have been chopped up. We have systematically carved up this place for housing. And as a result, our bays and our creeks are contaminated. The way people are being driven out because they can't afford to live here. But around the nature issue, it's the bays and the creeks that are contaminated because we have just overdone this place, and it continues. And it's not as if, Karl, we can continue to just let things go and do the same thing over and over again and expect that to change. I mean, Lake Agawam was fully developed by the time I was a teenager. There were houses around Lake Agawam. It is now the most contaminated body of water in New York State. So, we need to work on those houses too that are all there and get them to put in these denitrification systems, every single one, just like they're doing it around Georgia Pond, which is also seriously endangered or in jeopardy.
You give examples in this piece in this guest words piece of things being done, whether it has to do pesticides or whether it has to do with housing or whatever, in other areas that are enlightened and are in harmony with nature. Can you go through some of these actions, activities in other areas?
I'm not sure. What do you mean exactly?
Well, you talk about in the piece, let me go to the piece. Let's jump right here. Here's-
Okay. For example, I think I mentioned, so Martha's Vineyard said, enough is enough. And you know, it's interesting. Martha's Vineyard is in New England, and the Yankees have a different sensibility. They were willing to draw the line. They have set a maximum house size on Martha's Vineyard that is so much smaller than what we allow here. We don't actually set limits on housing. We have setbacks and we have various things in our communities, but you can still build in East Hampton Village, if you have 3 acres, you can still build a 15,000 square foot house. Martha's Vineyard set a limit of 3,500 square feet, which is a nice size house. You can exceed that under certain circumstances. There are numerous communities in New England that have banned chemicals on public spaces, that have made really concrete steps to limit chemical use, synthetic chemical use on landscaping in public spaces. There are also communities around the United States that have actually tried to put bans in place around lawn and other landscape chemicals. That's more complicated in New York State. New York State is one of the states where that needs to be done at the state level. We can't in East Hampton bar people from buying Roundup and squirting it on their driveway, although Roundup is actually being pulled from the shelves. I think this year or next year, Bayer, the new company that owns it, is actually pulling Roundup. Glyphosate is a cancer-causing chemical, and it's in Roundup, and yet you can still buy it at the store and use it. And glyphosate is used in agriculture as well. But anyway, my point simply is there are communities near us and all around the world that have said no more chemicals, and we haven't done that. We also haven't really put severe limits on housing sizes around energy. That said, the planning department in East Hampton is working on an energy code, which will really make people think about how big they want to build. The energy code will require them to meet very, very efficient standards through geothermal and solar, and it will be expensive. But if they can meet those, then maybe a bigger house is okay. So anyway, those are some examples.
What can people do to encourage these examples to be facilitated, to happen here?
Well, there are a number of people in my community. I live in Springs, in the town of East Hampton, and there are a number of people in East Hampton town who are advocating and working hard on this issue. Jane Maring she lives in Amagansett. She started something called Build in Kind, and she's attending town meetings. She's in the process of developing proposals and ideas to bring to the town board. And you can go to her website, buildinkind.com, and learn about that around all of these issues. Edwina von Gaal, who lives in Springs, has something called the Perfect Earth Project, which I think you've had on your show. She's terrific. Her website and her work is all around getting us, both as individuals, but also getting community and municipalities to understand that we're poisoning ourselves, and to stop it, to stop poisoning ourselves. We don't need to do this. We need clover and dandelions in our lawns. We shouldn't be using synthetic herbicides and synthetic insecticides. We don't need to do this. So those are two examples of, but there are a number of people in the community that are active around these issues.
You quote several times in your guest words piece what Rachel Carson has decades ago explained in terms of humanity. Well, as we get the title of the piece, where humanity is really, well, it's in the process of destroying itself.
Yeah, she says that we are essentially at war with ourselves. And I guess that comes from a philosophy, a very basic philosophy of mine, and all of ours, I would think, that we are, the human race is part of nature, and yet we're killing nature. We are killing nature, as you well know, as is well documented. We are destroying the possibility of life on Earth. The rate of species decimation on the planet is very fast, and it is being caused by human existence. So that's on the global scale. We're polluting our airs. We're polluting our waters. We're making Earth uninhabitable because that's the way we want to live. But we're killing ourselves. So her point simply is, in a way, in that I forget if it was a poem or if it was a part of her Silent Spring, basically she's saying we are at war with ourselves.
You end your piece, as Carson observed, we are at war with ourselves. And then you write, unless we begin right now to be totally honest about our perilous course, we will lose this war. And in the process, we will lose what's left of the very soul of this place we love. And incidentally, Biddle's superb piece is online. You can just put his name in, guest words, East Hampton Store, and read it. Let me ask you about Biddle Duke. I
just want to amplify for a second about that, because I think it's important when I say we have to be honest with ourselves. I think a lot of people, and I'm guilty of it myself, are unwilling to be slightly edgy, slightly eco-warrior. You go get coffee, why do you need that plastic lid? Everything that we do, every moment of our activity, we need to be questioning whether or not we need to be honest with ourselves about, is my activity right now having an impact on future generations in some way, through waste, through energy, through pollution? And I think a lot of times people are like, well, not my problem. I won't see this. I don't have to deal with this because it's going to happen later. Or I don't need to see it. It's just going to disappear into nature in some way. So anyway, that's partly what I'm talking about honesty. And people who build these monstrous houses, like, are you actually thinking about the future? Are you being honest about how your consumption is going to affect future generations? Sorry, you can ask me about me now.
Well, just how you went on this path, and this is on your website. Boy, you got into journalism. You have a master's degree from NYU in journalism, and you write, journalism is a public service and a linchpin of democracy, which is what initially drew me to it. And actually, there's journalism in your family. When I taught at Southampton College, I used to have my journalism classes interview your dad, Andrew Biddle Duke. Well, actually, my memory is he started off, he wrote for some ski magazine.
Yeah, no, he wasn't really a journalist. He was a great guy and a public servant, but he wasn't really a journalist.
No.
My mother was a journalist. She was a reporter in the 40s and 50s and was on the Today Show at the beginning with Mike Wallace. So yes, so going back in that direction, there's definitely journalism.
Robin Chandler was the name of your mother, who was actually an anchor person on the Today Show, national television. In terms of yourself and journalism, you published several newspapers and other publications up in Vermont. You've written for the Southampton Press. You've written for a variety. I mean, you were a founder of East Magazine, which it's quarterly. It's published by the.
We do 4 issues. I'm not directly involved anymore, but the East Hampton Star does 4 issues between sort of late spring and Christmas time.
You're right. You speak about journalism being a linchpin of democracy, and you've been involved in it for many decades. How's it doing these days? I mean, we've just been through a president who talked about media being enemies of the people. Just how you feel in this year today about the state of journalism in the United States, and also the state of journalism in regards to protecting, crusading for a livable environment.
It's a hard question. I would say journalism, in terms of information, it's all out there now. You can find all of the information. Unfortunately, journalism now has been co-opted by organizations that take pieces of information and use it to their advantage. Always has been the case, but it's so much more prevalent now. On the positive side, I mean, I was a publisher of newspapers in Vermont for 20 years, and an editor and an advocate of journalism in New England, and I still am an advocate of journalism. I think that there is great journalism out there. There's really fantastic work being done, but it is harder to find only because there's just so much chatter. There's so much information. There's just it gets lost in the sort of maelstrom of hate and sort of antagonism out there, as you point out, against journalism. But I think there's really great work that's being done. The coverage of the climate change coverage, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Guardian, or they're all doing good work. But there is a lot of advocacy, and that worries me. Advocacy in journalism, for sure, that worries me. It's always existed, but now we are more vulnerable to that criticism. Meaning, we editors and reporters and writers, because because people are using the media to advance their political careers. They're using it to advance their business interests, and that is happening.
I hear you were in Vermont, which is very green. I mean, it's extraordinary in terms of a place where nature has been protected and preserved. Why'd you come back here, particularly at this point in time, when where you grew up was actually an environmental crisis, whether Eastern Long Island is going to end up the same way so much of Western Long Island has ended up?
I'm not sure whether to talk about how much I love Vermont or to answer your question, but Vermont is, as you point out, doing a lot of the right things. On the issue of chemical use and synthetic chemicals, communities in Vermont can step up and say, we don't want synthetic chemicals to be used to be available and used in our community. And that was a state decision. Vermont is just a very special place. We came back, and I say we, my wife and I, for a bunch of personal reasons. She's a painter, and has many of her collectors are here in this very powerful, very wealthy orbit, and we had 2 grown children, both of whom live in big cities, LA and New York, and we didn't want to be in 2 places. We would come here a lot because her family is from East Hampton. And we wisely, 8 or 9 years ago, bought a little place in Springs. And we ended up spending a lot of time here some years ago, and decided that if we were to make the choice with our kids grown up, that this would be closer to a bigger airport. And so it was a personal decision, really. I love the ocean. I love the bays. I grow oysters, thanks to John Dunn, Barley Dunn at the East Hampton Shellfish Hatchery, and I'm a clammer and a fisherman, and I'm on the Energy and Sustainability Committee for the town of East Hampton, and I'm active in the community here. And I have family all around me in Springs. My aunt lives there. My 2 cousins live there. So Karl, it was a personal decision. Certainly wasn't a career decision. I sold my weeklies in Vermont 3 years ago.
Bad term. Bottom line, with a minute and a half left, talking about a short period of time, are you pessimistic or optimistic as to whether the east end of Long Island can be saved?
I guess the answer to that question is what do we mean by saved? I think we can do it. I think we can do it. I think in thinking about this, we've got a minute here. In thinking about this interview, I was wondering about this question, and I spoke to Jeremy Samuelson, who's the head of the planning department in East Hampton, the day before yesterday. And I was in a very sort of low moment, trying to figure out how I could be positive with you at this moment. And when you talk to a guy like that, you think, okay, we're going in the right direction. He's got it. I'm with him. He's developing an energy code. He's closing loopholes. He is fully aware. This is the person who takes proposals to the town board to guide us to a better future. He's got it completely figured out. Can he do it? Will the town boards have the political will? I don't know. But there are people doing good work, headed in the right direction. And I'm just going to have to remain positive that we're going to get there.
Great, Biddle. You've been listening to Biddle Duke, very wise words from Biddle Duke. I'm Karl Grossman. This has been Environment Long Island.